Matt, when you've had your visions, did they No, no. You know, a friend of mine who's a military guy, a retired military guy. He was like the highest level non-enlisted person. He was like a commander or something. He's a really, really cool guy. And he'd been through this horrible thing with his wife where his wife had a lover and a boyfriend, and they bankrupted him. They cleaned the accounts out, took every dime, and he was lying on the ground just crying and like, God, why did you do this? Why did you do this to me? Why did this happen? And the voice in his head said, I have delivered you. And what it was he was Catholic. And Catholic is till death do us part. And he had a partner who was a horrible drug addict and a terrible person, and he would not leave her any other way. So what he realized, the whole point of the story is he has a great saying, and he says, God works on the need-to-know basis. So it's a really cool story. And so when I had my vision, I didn't see how anything was going to happen, how it was going to play out. It was 1997. .com was booming. Building was booming. Oil was at a 30-year low when you factored inflation in. It was like still $10 a barrel, you know, and you know, everything on the surface seemed like it just couldn't be any better. And I get this semi-apocalyptic vision dropped on me, but they didn't show me any details. They didn't share they. And who is they? People often ask, well, who is they? You can describe it as the guides and masters, the Holy Spirit, the dudes on the other side. It doesn't really matter to me how you describe it. I like the Holy Spirit or the guides. I personally tend to refer to them as the guides. And it's clearly, it wasn't something that said this is Jesus, and it wasn't something that identified itself as a specific entity or group of entities. But I believed it was a higher source, and that was working through me, and then through my intention. And we all have that ability. When you with your intention, you can align with a higher power for guidance and inspiration. And I believe that that was what happened in that event. So I wish I could tell you more, that I had the answers, but I don't. So, yes?
I forgot, what was the question you asked when all that information came to you?
I asked for guidance and inspiration. Like, God, what should I do? Guide me, please, is basically what I asked. Guidance and inspiration, very generic. And sometimes I wish I hadn't asked it, because it really was like a big monkey wrench in the spokes of my life. And you know, it wasn't very good for me financially yet. I think my first publisher was bankrupt, and so I got a $10,000 advance. I spent $15,000 out of my pocket on research books and artists, and I lost a year's worth of wages. Do the math. So I didn't do very well. And then he didn't pay me, so then I had to spend $10,000 more on lawyers and CPAs and lose $25,000 worth of work fighting to get my book back. So at one point I was down close to $250,000 when you included, and that because I spent another $100,000 on interest in the debt I accrued from doing that. So when it was all told and done, at the worst low point I was down $250,000. Most of that was debt that I was paying on. And so I think I broke even like last year. So I've been working on it for 13 years. I've got 3 years of labor, and I broke even. So I'm a little above that. So I probably have earned about 1 or 2 cents an hour so far. So but my life ain't over yet. There's a lot of people have come up to me and said, from things in the healing chapter alone, that some of the stuff in there has changed their life and saved their life and given them their life back. And so it's worth it. So, okay. So this is, we already went through those quotes before, and we already went through why I wrote it. And we've pretty much gone through how can it fail, but we'll briefly, fires, earthquake, hurricanes, we've all seen that. Grid meltdown, we've talked about that. Pandemic, we haven't really talked about that much yet, so I'll talk about that a little. 1919 Spanish flu, 50 to 100 million people died worldwide. It pretty much shut business and stuff down for like months. Because people, if you went to the hospital, you had about a 30% chance of dying. If you went to the homeopath, you had about a 0.5% to 1.5% chance of dying with homeopathy. If you stayed home, you had a much better chance of living. And so people just started staying home. And things shut down. But in those days, you could drive your car or your horse and buggy, probably more like your buggy, over the hill, and you could buy some eggs and some bread and butter from the local farm and the local baker, and it was kind of no big deal when the planes and trains and automobiles weren't really flowing very well around the world for 6 to 9 months, during the worst part of the epidemic. Life still went on. It wasn't like today's complicated machine. Peak oil. Some people say that's global conspiracy. I know a lot of people in the oil industry, oil insiders, and from their point of view, it's real. There's 6 giant oil fields in the world. Every one of the 6 has passed its peak in oil and is declining to varying degrees. Space satellites, the Saudis don't talk much about it. They took over Aramco, booted out the foreigners, 20 years ago or so. So I know people who worked there up until the time they booted them out and said, no, we learned enough from you guys. It's our gig now. And they're doing major pumping of seawater and CO2 down the wells and pumping chemicals down the wells to keep them going. Now, the good news on there, and you don't know how true it is, but it's probably fairly true, is they claim to have another giant oil field. So that means there's one existing giant oil field in the world that's not been developed yet. And it was on 600-foot deep shifting sand dunes. So they had to develop the technology, and oil had to be priced high enough to pay going after that oil that's, try putting a derrick on 600-foot deep of shifting sands. It's a tough technological problem. So right now, basically, we're supporting the way we live by drill, baby, drill. And drill, baby, drill is sort of a double-edged sword. Drill, baby, drill means that it keeps us going with relatively affordable oil right now, but it means we get to the end of the line faster. And that's how Ronald Reagan solved the oil Arab crisis, was when the oil Arab people shut down the United States in '79 because of our support of Israel. It cut down world oil production by 5%, and within 6 months it tripled the price at the gas pump from only like a 5% worldwide reduction. So they started drilling all over the world. They started drilling heavily in Mexico and in Indonesia and lots of other places. Well, Mexico's Cantrell, which is one of those 6 giant oil fields, is decreasing at 23% per year now. It's like on a crash. Within 3 years, Mexico will probably be a net oil importer instead of an exporter, because in Mexico, it's the government-run oil company, and it's a major part of the income that keeps the government running in Mexico. And with their oil crashing, that's serious for the Mexican economy and the government, as well as everything else. So, yes, maybe it's a conspiracy, and maybe they're just trying to jack the prices up, but I don't think so, and I'll show you some things on that. Financial meltdown, societal collapse, we all know about that one. And the perfect storm, we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Okay, Mother Nature has built this most incredible survival mechanism into each and every one of us. It's in our DNA, you might call it your spiritual DNA. And see, those people who did not have that, our ancestors, well, they got popped in the pot, they got eaten by the saber-toothed tiger, and they died on the battlefield. So there's an intuitive guide, and I'm going to teach you a short exercise that might be one of the most important things I'm going to teach you, you're going to hear today. I call it the pit of the stomach exercise, and tomorrow Rick Miller is going to teach the pit of the stomach on steroids, which is kind of like going far beyond the simple process I'm going to teach you today. So rational mind is only as good as the information base you have to draw on. So I'm not saying not to use your mind, not to use your brain. It's a wonderful tool. It's a great tool. But in a crisis situation, you're probably not going to have CNN and the Weather Channel and your iPhone right there at your side to tell you what decision you should, give you all the information to make a good decision. So I'm going to use a story to illustrate this pit of the stomach process. So now you can tell when you can't trust your mind, when it's flip-flopping. When you're saying, oh, I think I should do this. And 30 seconds later, no, maybe I should do that. And oh, no, maybe I should do this. Okay, when you start seeing yourself doing that, which is a very common thing in a crisis situation, then that's when you have to say, wait a minute, I've got to shift my awareness to get into this inner compass to know what to do, because obviously I can't trust this mind that's changing its mind, whatever it is, every few seconds. So I'm going to start out with a real life scenario and use it to illustrate the matter. A while back, 10 years or so ago, there's a guy, James Kim, very popular guy in the TV media in San Francisco. He and his wife and 2 infant daughters were visiting friends in Seattle for Thanksgiving vacation. So they drove back after the Thanksgiving vacation. They're driving back down to the Bay Area, down I-5 through Oregon. And it's the middle of the night, and they had a reservation at a coastal town called Gold Beach in Oregon. And, it's kind of cloudy and rainy, and they're talking, and all of a sudden they realize that, oh my God, we missed the exit for the road to the coast, back like a couple hours back. And it's very late already, and if they got to backtrack 2 more hours and then go to the coast, it's going to be like 4 in the morning before they get there. So they look at a map, and they see this, paved road, but this small road that goes over the mountains to the coast. They say, oh, well, let's take that. That'll cut out an extra 3 or 4 hours of driving. So they start driving up this little road, and it gets littler and littler, and the rain starts changing to snow. And it turned out they actually got turned off the little road onto a logging road, but the little road would have been snowbound shortly anyway. So they're driving up this little road, and it's dropping off like cliffs in the dark, and it's slippery and skiddy, and they finally get freaked out and say, okay, we're obviously lost. We're going to go to sleep for the night, and we'll wake up tomorrow and get our bearings and get where we're going. So they wake up the next morning, and there's 2 feet of snow, and they got a 2-wheel drive car, no chains, and there's no cell phone reception. So a couple days go by, and nobody comes, and they're running out of water. They've run out of gas. The kids are really cold and really hungry, and they took their tires off a car and burned them in a fire, and hoping it would make black smoke and someone would see it and come, and nobody came. So James Kim says, okay, what do you do? It's like, I got to do what's right for my family. I got to go find help. And so he uses his rational mind and the, quote, rule of survival. Now I'm going to tell you there are no rules of survival. There are guidelines of survival. And what's right in one situation is not necessarily right in another situation. And this is where the inner compass comes in, and there are countless survivors of catastrophes and life and death situations. They'll tell you that at one point in their ordeal, something snapped inside, and they simply knew what they had to do. There was a quiet calmness, and they knew what they had to do. And so what happens? He makes a decision. The rule of survival is you follow the river, and it'll take you to civilization. So now I'm going to tell you what he should have done. At that point in time, when you're not really sure, you don't have the information to make a good choice, and this is the simple exercise that gets you started on this path, and I'm excited because I've never been through Rick's workshop, and he hasn't done it in 20 years, so since the Navy SEALs. But this will get you started. This is my exercise, and I've used it several times and it's worked. My wife kind of looks at me when I make a mistake, and why didn't you use the pit of the stomach? So you take a few breaths and you ask for help. Now, you might ask Jesus, offer a prayer, Jesus, Buddha, Mohammed, doesn't matter to me. It's what you're connected with. If you're, not spiritual or religious in any way, just say, help me please, generically. And then you start taking some really deep breaths. Now, you're going to try and avoid linear thought. You're going to keep it out of your head, out of your rational thought. So by taking deep breaths, you're going to focus your awareness here, and you breathe deeply, and you're going to feel the muscles. You're going to do this in pictures and feelings and not thought. So you're going to feel the muscles in your stomach, and if you're in a tight, tense situation, they're going to be probably knotted up. So you're going to keep breathing, and you might have to do a mantra like God is good, or whatever, or Om, or Ram. Or you don't have to say anything, but breathe and do steady, repetitive mantra until you can feel yourself relax and you can feel the thoughts in your head quieting down. Now what you're going to do is you're going to make a picture in your mind, and in your mind's eye you're going to visualize yourself doing the action in question. So in the case of James Kim, he would picture hiking down the river towards civilization. Now you're going to feel, again, you're avoiding thinking. You don't want to think this. It's feelings. You're bypassing this part of your brain, getting into your intuitive self. You're going to feel the stomach area. And if you feel it tighten up into a knot, or if you feel it get queasy and like kind of like sickly and queasy and nauseous feeling, bad choice. And be like, oh, wow, I thought I should go down the river, but it's not feeling very good. So then you say, okay, that doesn't feel very good. And sometimes you might try all the options and see which one felt best, because sometimes you'll have multiple options that feel just the same. So then maybe you do some deep breathing and you ask for help again, and you relax that stomach, get it feeling relaxed and calm and your thoughts calm. And now maybe say, well, maybe I should try being up on the ridge. Maybe if I hiked up to the ridge, somebody would flying by see me. Maybe I'll see over the ridge and there's like a fire from somebody's wood stove, or maybe I'll hear cars, whatever. Maybe I should be on the ridge. So you picture yourself going up to the ridge, and then you check out the stomach. Now maybe you get a bad feeling there. Maybe you say, well, maybe I should be in the car. Maybe I should stay in my car. And your mind again would scream at you and say, no, that's the chicken shit thing to do. It's like you got to act. This is a crisis. Your family's starving. Your family's freezing to death. You got to act. But maybe the stomach would say, good. Okay, so here's what really happened in this case. He went down the river. He was cold. He was wet. He was improperly clothed. He was found dead, lying face down on the side of the creek, died of exposure, and he was a half a mile away from a hunting cabin he could have broken into and gotten clothing and provisions and hiked another 5 miles out to the road and been safe. What about the wife and kids? Well, it turned out that the father of James Kim, when they didn't show up and report in from Gold Beach, started getting concerned and worried, and he started calling people and authorities, and they were able to track this bounces off cell phone towers to get an idea of the general location where he was in cell phone. And they sent out search parties, and they found the tracks in the snow, and they found the car, and they found the wife and the kids. And they were cold and hypothermic, but no permanent damage, and they were okay. So it was a tragic story with at least a semi-sweet ending, but it illustrates a really good point. So I will tell you, when you're trying to decide and distinguish between the voices in your head, that if it's flip-flopping, it's not the voice of spirit. Usually the voice of spirit or intuitional guidance is quiet and calm. It's always unchanging. But sometimes, in a crisis situation, it's almost literally screaming at you inside your head. I mean, I remember, one situation in the past, a couple times, where that voice, that feeling in my head was literally screaming at me almost of extreme danger that I was in, and I had to do something. And nothing tragic happened, and I believe nothing tragic happened because of the action I took. Now, I will never really know because I wasn't there to see the consequences of not having listened to that. But I can point to 2 instances in my life where I think that I was in extreme danger with my wife. Once was from a hitchhiker, and once was from a jealous old boyfriend. And I think in both cases it would have been quite tragic if I hadn't listened to that. So most of the time it's quiet and calm and unchanging. It's always unchanging, but in those 2 instances it was a feeling of total impending doom, and I had to act and had to do something. Okay. So your disaster and prep plan. It says see handout, but I'm sorry. You can go to my website and download it for free at whentechfails.com, or it's in both of my books. And it's like guidelines to help you develop a plan for yourself and your family. And you tailor it for your budgets and your desires and the state of the world. I might get a little further in there in a few minutes, but it's things like simple things like having a local meeting place so that if you're separated and there's no communications, you can't get home, that you all go to the school grounds, or you all go to some place that you and your family in your town or city could find your way to if you're separated and can't communicate with each other and perhaps can't get home. Simple little things like that. Where to shut off your gas and your electric in the house, how to shut off the water in your house. Basic kind of things. Like if there's an earthquake, immediately try to shut off that gas. You should have one of those levers on the gas shutoff valve or next to it so that anyone in the family can run out and just turn the gas off. Because earthquakes are classic for busting gas lines and burning places down. Simple little things like that. Start simple in your plans with the basic 72-hour grab-and-go survival kit. And I've got full details in both books and on the website for free. And I'm going to show in this I'm going to show, and I've got a whole bunch of show and tell things. So I'm going to go through some really key items and some items that you won't see in other people's lists that I think are really important to have, and a couple of little more expensive items that, if you're really worried about long-term collapse, would be good items to have depending on your budget. You know, you got to always balance things, like what's worth spending the money on, what's not. Develop self-healing and first aid skills and supplies, and we're going to go into that more too. Self-reliance, food storage, personal protection, self-defense supplies, and skills in your long-term plan. I'll talk more about that too in this presentation. Okay, the rule of threes. This is just kind of a nice guideline to give you an idea of where your priorities need to be. Well, if you've got 3 seconds without breathing, access to air, with blood, without blood flow to the brain, in 3 seconds you lose consciousness. So it's like maintaining blood flow to your brain, absolutely critical. In a life and death situation, you don't have blood flow to the brain, it's over. It's game over very quickly. 3 minutes without air or breathing, the ability to breathe, and you pass out, and then it's game over unless somebody else rescues you and fixes it for you. 3 hours, and these are rough guidelines. Realize, like 3 hours without proper shelter in extreme weather, like extreme heat, Sonoran Desert, or extreme cold, and you don't have proper shelter and clothing, you get hypothermic, hyperthermic. Of course, it's 3 hours. It could be 8 hours in one situation. It could be 20 minutes. If you're in the ice-cold ocean without proper clothing, you know, in 10 minutes you're probably hypothermic and starting to pass out. Most of us can live about 3 days without water. That's what we were talking about earlier. But like I mentioned, some of the guys in the mine collapses for 9, 10 days without water. People in the Sonoran Desert, half day without water, they could be over. And most of us could live at least 3 weeks without food. I have run 10 miles through the mountains in my backyard after a 10-day fast with no solid food for 10 days. So it's very doable. And in fact, in this situation, it's not a pleasant subject, but it's so important I'm going to mention it anyways. When you're fasting, the first time I ever did a fast, I had a roommate, female roommate, nothing romantic, just sharing a house in Palo Alto. And she was talking about doing a fast and the health benefits. It sounded kind of hokey to me, and I sort of agreed to do it. She ended up punting on it, but I ended up doing it. And the philosophy in the fast is that in the morning, your body goes through a natural cleansing cycle, starts dumping toxins into the colon. But when you're focused on digesting foods and eating foods, it doesn't do a very good job of cleaning out. And when your subconscious awareness is not focusing on food, it does a really good job of cleaning toxins out of the body. So when you don't eat, after a while you dump all these toxins. And then in the afternoon, it's like your body says, well, I'm hungry. And it starts reabsorbing toxins from the colon. And you might feel headachy and nauseous, like, oh my God, I've got to eat something. I just feel terrible. And then you do an enema or some other way of cleaning your colon, and you feel fine. And it sounded like such a bunch of bull to me until I did it. And that come 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm feeling terrible and like I got to eat something, and I simply just wash out with water inside, and 20 minutes later, headache gone, energy levels fine, and I don't feel I feel about 10 times less hungry than I did 20 minutes earlier. So it's for real. Now, the Fasting Institute in Sweden, they had this demonstration where they had a bunch of fasters, and they went out and they hiked 30 miles a day along the freeway, or along the roads in Sweden, on no food at all. And so, in one time I drove cross country, and I was fasting the entire time driving cross country, and my wife, I had a VW bus, and my wife would go to sleep in the back and wake up, and I'd still be driving. I could drive 20 hours a day when I was fasting. Of course, I was younger, and I was cleaner and healthier living. But it's like people think I can't function without food. Now, it's true. If I was going to go out and do hill sprints fasting, I wouldn't do nearly as well as I would do normally. Hopefully, you'll never get to that. 72-hour grab and run kit. That's like... And this is where scenarios are so important. So I know people who've got perfectly packed grab-and-go kits and carry it in their car, like wherever they go, and I'm not one of them. Maybe I should be more paranoid. It's like, here I am telling everybody, and I don't have my kit in the car every day wherever I go. But I'm just not that worried about it. I kind of hope that my intuitive thing will tell me when something really big is going, and I have to be that level. And I like to have multiple options on hand. So I have my backpack, a high quality. This is an Osprey pack. It's a buddy of mine. I knew him when it was him working full-time out of a little teeny rundown house in Santa Cruz and his girlfriend working half-time, and now he's like the largest manufacturer in the country of high-quality backcountry packs. Really, really good stuff. You know, it makes sense if you have the bucks to get really high-quality gear for your pack. This is Osprey, O-S-P-R-E-Y. There's lots of really good packs out there. You know, there's not like he's the only one. And you can go to REI, you can go to EMS, you can go to any of the big backcountry stores and get really good gear. I mean, the gear today is just so great compared to when I was a kid. Yes?
If you do have the money to get that kind of gear, it's real important to have it fitted. If you go to REI, like
Yeah.
I wanted an Osprey pack, but it didn't fit me.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
It felt too heavy when I had the same. They loaded them with 20 pounds of weight.
Yep.
And I ended up, I've forgotten what brand I got, but it was something else because it felt much lighter when I had that weight.
Everybody's back is different, so that's a really good point. Everybody's back and body type is different. So, you know, I'm partial to that, but I haven't gone out and tried 20 different packs on, so I can't say that I wouldn't try some other one and it would feel good. This one feels good to me, but you know, compared to the gear I used to do all kinds of stuff on, it's all great. You know, it's all tremendous. So, so I have my stuff. I have a blue tub. And I have various other goodies in racks in my garage. I have a big box with backcountry gear in it. And I have my pack. And so most of the time, I've also got a travel trailer with a nice large solar panel and two really big 6-volt golf cart batteries. And so naturally, I'd rather just, you know, throw the blue tub and a bunch of food and stuff into my trailer and my truck and go on down the road. But if I have to put it on my pack because there's no gasoline flowing and I must leave my area, or because there's been an earthquake and the bridges have fallen down and there's a wildfire bearing down on me and I've got to get down to the river with whatever I can carry because everything else will probably be molten in cinders when I get back home, you know, I need to be ready for that scenario too. I mean, I hope it never happens. But so that's why I have a variety of things. So for instance, I have this really cool River Guide first aid kit right here. And it's in a waterproof container. They use it like in, you know, river rafting and kayaking. And it's got air splints in it, and I get hemostats, and I can stitch up wounds if I had to, and splint broken bones. But if I'm going down the road with my backpack, I'm not going to take that. I'm going to take, I got this for my backpack. And in this, I have a Sterapen, and I have an ACE bandage, and I have some moleskin for blisters, and oh, there's some more things missing out of here. But anyway, I use stuff. And here's my first aid kit. So my first aid kit involves my most valuable thing is gone, probably because I was using it somewhere else. An 1.5-inch roll of cloth adhesive tape that climbers use all the time. And that's probably the most valuable thing in my grab-and-go kit, besides my water filter. I mean, there's a bunch of valuable things, but when you start hoofing it down the road, you know, most people will blister up if they're not doing that on a regular basis. And before you start getting blisters, stop, pull your shoes and socks off, or wherever the blister, you know, the hot spot is. Take some of that 1.5 inch cloth adhesive tape, take about 6 inches off, take the sticky side of it and scrub the oils and scum off of your skin where the hot spot is, so it gets really clean and makes the skin get sticky instead of slippery. and then throw that away or put it in your pocket, and then take some fresh tape out and tape out the hot spots, and you're back in business again. And I mean, I've done tons of backcountry trips, and believe me, I haven't pulled my shoes off once or twice and really, really regretted waiting, and then by the time I pulled the shoes off, I had blisters and they popped, and then, you know, you've got open wounds you're dealing with. And once you do that once or twice, you never let that happen again. You just pull them off. You said, okay, I feel a hot spot. I'm going to stop, take a break, take a breather, and tape up. So that's like, and you sprain an ankle, tape your ankle. You got a wound, you're gushing blood. You make some butterfly pieces out of it. You tape the wound shut, and, you know, or whatever reason. You got a tear in your tent, you tape the tear. Yeah, it's great stuff. Okay, I'm going to, some of these I'll go into more specifically too. Okay. The water, so this is why I have like multiple things here. I have versions, like I have my, this is a really cool, high quality hand crank radio, AM, FM, and shortwave. It can't send shortwave, but it can receive it. It's Baygen free play. Now inside my kit, if I can find it, I've got a piece of junk. Yeah, there it is. Okay, this is what most people have. And, you know, you can probably use it a few times. Sometimes they break the first time you use them. And it looks good, and it's cheap, and it does all kinds of bells and whistles. But if you actually really use it for a while, you know, it's got a very limited life for how long you're going to use it. But certainly I wouldn't be carrying this in my backpack. You know, I have too many more valuable things to carry. So this goes in my blue tub. And for instance, I've got in the water filters, this is a big Berkey. And so if I'm setting up camp for a while or in my trailer and I want to filter out radioactive water or, you know, arsenic or whatever, this is a gravity feed water filter, and it's nice and easy. You just pour water in the top and it slowly percolates to the bottom, and then you use a little tap out the bottom and you're in business. It's great. It lasts for thousands of gallons, and it's easy to use, and it's wonderful. But there's no way this is going in my backpack. Well, radioactive, anything with activated carbon and a very tiny particle size that will filter out bacteria will, for the most part, do radioactive stuff too. Because those radioactive particles are generally, by the time they get to you, they're big enough particles and stuck to other things so that if you have a nice fine filter, I'm not saying every trace of radioactivity will get taken out, but it'll probably take like 99% of it out. And so 99% is a whole lot better than nothing. Well, I don't know the exact stats on Berkey for it, but I'm just saying it's going to do, if it's a good bacterial filter with carbon, activated carbon, it's going to do a really good job about getting radiation out of there. But not 100%, but a good job. You know, much better than nothing.
Is that a ceramic filter?
No, this is a composite filter. My backcountry filters are ceramic. This is kind of like a sintered carbon elements. There's sintered carbon block and or pressed carbon block, and they are fine enough pores to be bacterial static, to not let bacteria and protozoa through them. It's not a viral. You know, thing about viral filters is that viral filters are so tiny, unless they're viral because of iodine impregnation or silver, that they plug up like really fast. And so I'm not really keen on viral filters. And when they're viral rated because they have iodine or silver in them, then the dwell time has to be extremely slow with the water percolating through them to actually be effective. So I don't really trust viral filters, and they plug so fast, so I'm not really keen on them. I'm keen on, if you're worried about viruses, doing it through your filter and then adding some iodine or adding some chlorine dioxide or zapping it with your SteriPen. You know, that's much safer than trusting a viral filter. So, yeah.
I have a question. If you were to take, say, fire leftover charcoal, how far off is it from the microfilter? Would it
It's
have any
far
far
off. Yeah.
Would it be useful at all? You know, that would
It would be, I know, I show like a primitive sand filter with charcoal in When Technology Fails, and it's kind of like, actually what's really most effective, if you combine it with a primitive sand filter, it's pretty decent. And what really makes sand filters work is that they develop a bioactive gelatinous layer on the top of the sand filter so that it actually gets better as you use it. And so the sand filters are, but you need a lot. Like, you know, like you get like a garbage can, a 50-gallon drum, and you fill it, and you wash the sand out like in a wheelbarrow with some fairly clean water, and then you build it up, and then you flush it through there, and actual natural probiotic bacteria start growing in it, and they kind of start they sort of make a bioactive component that makes the filter more effective, because they're really pretty coarse. I mean, but they do work. They're not 100%. I'll take boiling or a real backcountry filter over sand filter any day. But you know, if things have really fallen apart and failed, then I would, you know, and I had the ability to it, I'd build a sand filter. But it's not something I'd trust first. And there's a SARI filter too, S-A-R-I, where you take like they teach that in India, to fold the sari over like 6 times. So you get a huge number of layers, and then you tie it around the neck of a bottle and dip it in. And it decreases dysentery and cholera by, you know, like 75%. It's not 100% effective. And then what you do at the end, then you lay the sari out, you rinse it off in water and lay it out in the sun to let the UV rays of the sun bleach it and sterilize it again before you reuse it. So it's ways of improving your chances and decreasing your ability to get sick. They also teach SODIS, solar disinfection, is taught in the third world now. And so if you can scavenge, so for instance, say you were, you know, the earthquake happened, the apocalypse happened, and you don't have all these cool tools, or they have, you know, gone away. If you can scavenge a bunch of like mineral water bottles, and you fill them up with water and you lay them horizontally in the sun, and if it's on a hot climate, lay them on a dark surface, and you get combination UV sterilization and pasteurization. And see, when you exceed 135 degrees Fahrenheit for, you know, like 10 minutes or so, then it doesn't necessarily kill the bacteria, but it deactivates them so that they don't reproduce any longer. And that's called pasteurization. That's what they do with milk, because when you boil milk, it screws it up, so it doesn't, it's like not really right for drinking and doing stuff. And so pasteurization is heating it to an elevated temperature for long enough to basically deactivate the bad bacteria. Even though they're not officially dead, they're kind of like not really functioning anymore. And eventually, pasteurized milk will still spoil because there was some tiny bit of bacterial action inside. It's not like a septic thing. But it's way better. If you don't pasteurize, it spoils real fast. So let's see. Okay, I'll talk about the SteriPen. This is, how many people seen Men in Black? Right. Okay, well, here we go. Ready, everybody? What you do with the SteriPen is, it's kind of like Men in Black. And only what you do is you push the button and you turn it upside down. While the green light's flashing, see nothing, the blue light's not going off, the flashy thing hasn't happened yet. It's got these little electrodes because it would be harmful to your eyes if you were staring at it when it went off. And you put it in your water bottle, and as soon as it gets immersed in water, the electrodes see that, and the blue light goes off. And you swirl it around for about 15 seconds till the blue light turns back off, and all the bugs are dead. And my daughter, I'll answer your questions in just a second. My daughter took my SteriPen, never gave it back, and she took it up Kilimanjaro with her fiance, now husband, and she used my SteriPen religiously and never got sick, and she's the only one in the whole group of like 10 people there, whatever, that didn't get sick. And so it really does work. The downside is, if it's scummy green ditch water, all bets are off on your SteriPen. It's got to be clear water. So if it's scummy water, you've got to filter it first and then use your SteriPen. So if you're really worried about the water, then you run it through your filter, and then you either hit it with a SteriPen or you hit it with some iodine drops or halazone to kill the bacteria and the viruses that are left. Now here's chemical treatment versus these other treatments. Boiling will kill all living organisms except for prions, which aren't really alive. That's mad cow disease. I mentioned it this morning. It's a minor concern unless you find that there happens to be in your area, that it's spreading. I mean, I'm just making you aware of it in case someday it comes up, that you can't sterilize against prions by boiling stuff. But everything else, once you reach the boiling point, it's long since far surpassed the pasteurization point. And some people say you got to boil for 10 minutes. Well, I've talked to the experts of the experts, and they said that's crock. That once it's hit boiling, the stuff's dead. Yeah. And then chemicals. A bottle of bleach will treat thousands of gallons of water. You need about 5 drops per quart of bleach. The good side is that a little bit of bleach goes a long ways. If the bleach is kind of old, you have to double the amounts. Like after a year or two, it loses its strength. Downside is that there's some really nasty bugs that make you extremely sick that can survive full-strength Clorox bleach, much less diluted bleach, overnight and still be viable. It's called cryptosporidium. And in the late 90s, it made 500,000 people sick in Milwaukee and killed 500 people. And it's a really nasty bug, and it's hard to get rid of. And it lives in the guts of lots of domestic animals, cows, sheep, goats. And so if you're in an area that's agricultural, there's a really good chance that there's cryptosporidium in surface water. And I'm sure up in the Sierras they got it. What do you think, Pete? Is there crypto? There's crypto around here, right? Lots? Yeah. And there's definitely lots of giardia. Now, the good news about crypto and giardia is they're like really big bugs compared to bacteria. They're single-celled animals, protozoa, which means that they can actually move around like amoebas or cilia and whatever. And so they're much larger and they're easier to filter out. So the filters, if it's a decent backcountry filter, it definitely filters them out like that. The bad news is that your chemicals really aren't very good in them. There's one chemical that kills crypto quite well, and it's called chlorine dioxide. And the trade name of that is Aquamira. And the other trade name is if you can make it yourself. So one of the things in my go bag is MMS, Miracle Mineral Supplements. And it's kind of nasty stuff, to be honest with you. I really don't like it very much, but I've got it just in case. Anyway, it's down in there somewhere. You have an A and a B part, and you can make it from, you buy citric acid and you buy, Rick, what's the name of the other stuff? Oh, I know, I'm spacing on it now. It's in my book. Let me look it up. Yeah, sodium hypochlorite, that's right. And so you mix the sodium hypochlorite and you follow the directions very, very specifically. And then you mix the, yeah. I'm not even sure if that's quite correct. I have to look it up. Sodium chlorite, that's correct. Sodium chlorite. And you follow the directions very specifically. And then, yeah, I mean, don't stray in those directions. And then you can use as an activator either citric acid, which is the better one to use, or you can use lemon juice or vinegar. You can, right, all of those work, and you've got to follow the directions, and I've got them in the new book, When Disaster Strikes, not in the old book, because I didn't know about it then. But here's the downside. There is no one cure-all that's good for everything. It just doesn't exist that I have seen yet. And I'm going to go through like my top 10 stuff in alternative herbs. And the reason I'm on MMS now is that it also can be used, it is chlorine dioxide. When you mix it together, it's very good for purifying water, and it will kill cryptosporidium. And so that's why I'm bringing it up now instead of later in the talk. But it's one thing you can carry that will both purify water and it will heal malaria in 3 days and cure a variety of conditions. And if there's this next superbug in Black Plague or whatever coming around the world, chlorine dioxide made from MMS might save your life. It might not, but it might save your life. So it's a good thing to have on hand. What's the downside? The downside, it's not good on everything. It tastes like you're drinking bleach. And it can actually make fungal situations worse. I had a climbing shoe in the 70s that had a rubber layer in it called an EB, and that kept it from stretching. It was 2 layers of canvas with rubber in between, and it was famous for growing toenail fungus in climbers. And so a bunch of us from that era got like this really nasty fungus that is really hard to get rid of. And when I take chlorine dioxide, it's taken me a year to get my feet back the way. I'm still not back to where I was before a year ago. I was trying it on it to see if it made it better, and it went crazy. My feet and legs swole up. I mean, it like fed the fungus. And it turns out that Jim Humble, the inventor of MMS, also suffers from that fungus too. So he's cured himself of skin cancers and malaria and a bunch of things, but it also made a fungal situation a lot worse for him. So it's not a cure-all. Some people say it's great for fungus, but boy, I tell you, the nail fungus I have, it made it skyrocketed. It's terrible. So I stay away from it. But I've got it, because if I've got something that I'm going to die from maybe and nothing else is working, I'm willing to take the chlorine dioxide and see if it works the MMS, and suffer the consequences of it making my toenail fungus worse. So, okay.
What about life straws? Have you heard of those?
Yeah. I think a life straw in a little tiny kit is a great thing to have, but they are so small. I don't like to, I like to have something that's cleanable and field serviceable that I know will last me a long time for thousands of gallons, and I don't have that level of confidence in a life straw. So I think in like a little teeny bag in your car.
Just for like on the go, it's good.
Yeah.
Does it get like all the bacteria?
Well, I think it does. I think it's certified to get all the bacteria and stuff. So I think it's good from that point of view. It's just that it's such a small device, I wouldn't trust it to do me long term, to really, handle my needs. So this is the filter that I carry all the time. It's a MSR filter, and it's a really great backcountry filter. Might be in my pack, might be in my bag. Oh yeah, there it is. And the nice, Katadyn is a really excellent. I mean, I like to get stuff that's like the standard for backcountry mountaineering types, because people are taking it to Nepal and Everest. They're taking stuff that's really reliable, that's field serviceable, that you're out in the middle of nowhere, you can count on it. And there's lots of good product out there. I'm not saying that these are the only good ones. I'm just saying these are the ones I trust and like, because I can take this apart and when the cartridge is plugged up, like I put it in some scummy ditch water and it's not working and it's all plugged up, then I can take the cartridge out, and it's got a ceramic outside and a carbon core. So the carbon core will take up like nasty chemicals and tastes and odors, and the ceramic outside will take out the nasty bugs. It won't take out viruses. Most of the viruses will get taken out by this, because viruses are usually stuck to bigger stuff, but it's not guaranteed to take out viruses. And so when this gets plugged up on the outside, you take your green Scotch-Brite pot scrubber, and a little piece comes along with it, and you scrub the outer layer off until it's kind of white again, and then you put it back together and you're good. And then on the bottom of the filter, maybe not on this one, it's probably missing, there's a little gauge, and when the gauge, it allows you to slip over the outside, it means you've worn off so much of the outer layer that it's no longer guaranteed bacteriostatic. Because once it gets too thin on the outside layer, like you can scrub it about 20 different times to re-clean it. And once it gets too thin, then it's time to replace. And so, in a situation long term, I mean, I'd certainly not chuck it when it gets too thin. I'd still use it. I just know, it's compromised. So you can take the pump apart and service it if there's a problem, change an O-ring, whatever. You can have a little rebuild kit you bring with you as a backup. So it's like, if you have a pleated membrane filter, they work great. They pump easier than this. They're more convenient. But when that membrane's plugged, it's plugged. You just chuck it and you get something else. And, in a situation like what we're talking about, I want to be able to service it and then put it back together and get to go again, and not have to go back to REI and, get another piece for the center. So, and this threads on the top of many standard water bottle threads, like the big clear bottles. Yeah, it probably threads on that. Let's see. Yeah. So you just, when I travel, sometimes when I travel, I just bring this so that I can take really yucky chlorinated water out of the faucet and give myself bottled water, quality water, without having to go buy bottles of water. I just bring this along, like I brought it to Europe the one time in my life I ever went there, and my wife and I were just sitting there pumping a couple quarts of water every morning, so we had good water to drink because the water tasted terrible. So,
I took one from Nepal. The only downside was that if I left it out at night it would freeze. So I figured out that I'd sleep with it. You know?
oh, yeah.
Or warm it up in the morning.
Right, right. When I did solo backcountry trips in my younger years across the Sierras, and it was like 20 below, I would, because it was such a pain to melt snow all the time to drink, I always skied with a bottle of water inside my sweater, and I would drink out of it and then stuff it up full with snow and put it back in there. Now, if you're in a crisis situation where you're really cold, people say, well, should I eat snow, should I not eat snow? And it's like, if you've got body heat to spare, by all means eat snow. Like if you're hot and you're sweating, then eat snow. If you're hypothermic, if you're really cold and you're wet and you go eat snow, I mean, it's a tough call, because is your thirst worse for you and dehydration worse for you, or eating the snow and losing the heat worse for you? You're going to have to make that judgment call, because eating snow could kill you if you're cold and wet and you eat some snow. It could hamper your judgment and throw you over the edge where you make a bad decision and die, or you just lie down in the snow and die. And so, you know, things to consider. Also consider, if you're in the cold and you can't feel your fingers or your toes, stop and swing your hands really fast like this. Put them in your armpits until you can feel them again. Because it's nice and warm and fuzzy feeling when they're numb and you no longer feel them, but you can't tell if they're just numb and cold or if they're frozen when you can no longer feel them. And the same thing with your toes. I made a mistake on a backcountry trip. I had an older backcountry boot that was a split leather, and it sucked up a lot of water. And it was before I learned the trick about putting plastic baggies inside and outside my socks. So my feet got kind of wet in the warmth of the day. I crossed into a low altitude river crossing and then got up higher. And the sun went down and it dropped to like below zero as I'm pitching camp. And my feet were numb. And I thought, nah, damn, I'm going to be in my sleeping bag in a few minutes, have this up, no problem. Well, the front quarter inch of my toe turned black and my toenail fell off. And luckily it didn't spread into gangrene, and eventually the black hunk of the tip of my toe peeled off. But that was it could have been a lot worse. You know? It could have been a lot worse. So, you know, and if your feet are frozen solid and you've got a long time to go, don't thaw them. Keep them frozen. Because freezing and thawing flesh is the worst thing you can do for your flesh. But I mean, it's far better to keep things from freezing. But once they thaw, that's going to blister and ooze. When I was a little kid, I was skiing in Quebec during Carnival. I grew up in Vermont, and it was 40 below at the top and 35 below at the bottom. A warm, balmy day in northern Quebec. And I was so cold when I got off the chairlift that I just went straight to the bottom with no stops. And I had a thick wool hat on, and when I got in the bottom, I felt my ear, and it felt weird, and I bent it, and it stayed bent.
That's not good.
Not a good sign. Not a good sign.
Not a good sign.
And I was probably like 9 years old, and boy, was I screaming when they thawed out. And then they blew up like Mickey Mouse, and they burst, and they oozed, and they blistered, and I had them wrapped in gauze and antiseptic, and not a good thing. Not a good thing. So actually, after that, you know, when it was that cold, I had a hood over there to prevent, and a big thick wool hat, so that the hood would keep the wind from penetrating through. Anyway, so I've learned some things the hard way in my life. You know, you're getting the benefit of some of my mistakes here.